He called me a filthy beggar and tossed a fistful of 20s at my shoes, right there in the church hall under the yellow lights and paper snowflakes. I didn't say a word. I bent, picked up each bill like it was a fallen hymn page, and slid. Then beneath the crumpled plumbing invoice he'd promised to cover. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. St. Bartholomew's Fellowship Hall, Columbus, Ohio, Wednesday, November 20th, 6:15 p.m. The place smelled like coffee and powdered sugar. Someone stirred a cup so hard the wooden stick kept clicking glass. My daughter Lily went pale. Ethan, her husband, stood there in a camel coat, smiling for his sister's phone like this was a prank. "Keep the change, old man," he said, chin tilted, as if humiliation were a kind of charity. The amount. On the invoice, $2,800 for a burst pipe in their kitchen, glowed through the thin paper when it caught the light. He had promised to handle it. He had promised Lily. He had promised me. I kept my mouth closed. I pressed the stack of bills flat with the heel of my hand, then folded the invoice over them once, neat like a church bulletin. People stared but pretended not to. Pastor Jim's eyes met mine and stayed there, steady as a hand on a shoulder. Candace, Ethan's sister, kept filming with that awful little smile, the kind people wear when they've decided compassion doesn't trend. I could feel every year of my 62 settling into my bones. Outside, flurries skimmed the parking lot and salted the blacktop white. I sat in my truck and set the folded invoice on the dash beside my old wedding band, which I can't bring myself to put away. A few of the 20s had tracked grit. I brushed them clean with my thumb, one by one. I thought about Lily at 8 years old, bandaged knees, begging me to push her higher on the swing. I thought about the kitchen I'd fixed last week, the copper sweat on the solder seam still bright when I left. Humiliation wants you loud and sloppy. Dignity asks you to count. So I opened my spiral notebook and wrote, Nov 20, Church Hall, Ethan threw cash. Witness, Pastor Jim, video, Candace. I underlined the amount, 2,800, twice, slow and dark. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I'd saved for 2 years but never called. 8:41 p.m., the screen said, blinking like a dare. Attorney Erin Doyle. When she answered, I told her only what mattered. "I'm tired of being embarrassed," I said. "Good," she replied, voice calm as a level on a workbench. "Start writing everything down. Names, dates, amounts, keep the bills, the envelope, the words he used. We'll let their signatures do the talking." I watched my breath cloud the windshield and imagined each detail settling into place like screws finding their threads. I drove home past the unlit car lots and shuttered diners, the kind where you can still get meatloaf on a Tuesday. The invoice rode beside me, the money tucked inside like a disrespectful bookmark. At a red light, I pressed the fold so it would keep its crease. By the time I turned onto my street, the flurries had turned to a light, steady dust. My porch bulb hummed. Inside, I laid the invoice on the kitchen table and smoothed it once more. The clock over the stove ticked like it was counting not seconds but small decisions. I set a clean envelope beside the paper and pulled open the drawer where I keep receipts, the roof patch from November 3rd, the water heater valve from the 9th, evidence, yes, but also a record of how I keep what's mine. My hands shook, not from fear, from the sudden weight of quiet. I told myself I would sleep. I knew I wouldn't, because shame is loud in the dark, and in the dark you hear things clearly, the scrape of a chair, the word beggar, the soft slap of cash on old shoes. I turned, off the light and left the envelope on the table, empty for now, waiting for whatever came next. I drove home that night with his money in my pocket and shame in my throat. Route 23 was slick with sleet, headlights bleeding across the asphalt like tears you can't blink away. I gripped the wheel tighter than I needed to. My breath fogged the glass. In the seat beside me, the envelope of crumpled 20s looked heavier than a bag of bricks. When I walked inside, the house was too quiet. My wife's photograph hung over the mantel, her smile caught forever in a frame she'd chosen 20 years ago. I sat down at the kitchen table and laid the bills out one by one beside the invoice, just like I used to spread out nuts and bolts while fixing a carburetor. There was something about the order that steadied me. But that night, even the order looked wrong. I told myself not to cry, that I was too old for that, too used to humiliation to let it sting. But when I saw that old handwriting on the invoice, my own scrawl next to repair complete, something cracked open. It wasn't just the money. It was what it meant, that I'd spent my life building things straight, level, fair, and somehow ended up the joke at my own family table. I brewed coffee I didn't need and sat with the cup untouched. The house smelled like burnt beans and cold metal. The clock above the sink ticked 12:17 a.m., steady and merciless. I kept seeing Ethan's grin, that flick of his wrist, the slow float of bills onto the floor. I whispered out loud just to hear something human. He called me a beggar. At 1:12 a.m., the oven timer went off. I'd forgotten to switch it off after dinner. The sharp ding startled me enough to laugh, one of those broken, tired laughs that doesn't last long. I wrote another line in my notebook. Nov 21. Couldn't sleep. Oven timer rang. Remember humiliation. Do not confront yet. Before sunrise, I took a small cardboard box from the pantry, placed the invoice and the bills inside, sealed it with painter's tape, and labeled it with my work pen. Ethan, $2,800, church. It felt like tagging evidence at a crime scene, and maybe it was, just not the kind that left blood. When the light broke through the curtains, I made a call to Pastor Jim. He picked up on the second ring, voice soft and steady as always. "Morning, Jim," I said. "Did you see what happened last night?" "I saw enough," he replied. "You did the right thing walking away." "I'm not sure what the right thing is anymore," I said. "Keep your peace," he told me. The proud trip on their own shoes. After we hung up, I felt a strange calm. Maybe it was resolve, maybe exhaustion. Either way, it was solid. I sat back down at the table and looked at the pile of receipts. Roof patch from Nov 3, heater valve from Nov 9, lock set from Nov 14. They weren't just scraps of paper, they were proof of who I still was. At 7:06 a.m., a text buzzed from Erin, the attorney I'd called the night before. "Document, don't chase," she wrote. "Humiliation makes you reactive. Documentation makes you powerful." I stared at that message for a long time. The words hit like a hammer in wet cement. She was right. The kind of revenge that worked wasn't loud. It was quiet, written, dated, notarized. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and opened the notebook again. Beneath the first line, I wrote 3 words and underlined them twice. Stay very quiet. That morning, I decided something. Ethan would never see me beg again. Not for respect, not for family, not for forgiveness. If he wanted a performance, I'd give him silence instead. The kind that builds a case, not a scene. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and soundless. I stood at the window, holding the pen, thinking of how still justice must look before it moves. Humiliation fades slower than bruises. But numbers? Numbers heal. That's what Erin told me when I walked into her office on December 1st, clutching a notebook and the sealed box labeled Ethan, $2,800 as church. Her office sat above a bakery on High Street, the smell of yeast and sugar bleeding through the floorboards. Erin was younger than I expected, mid-30s maybe, but sharp-eyed, with a calm that could sandpaper rage into strategy. She didn't start with sympathy. She started with structure. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said, pen poised. I did, every detail. When I finished, she leaned back. "Then we start with what you already have." I spread the papers across her desk. The invoice, the bills, the note from Pastor Jim, and a phone screenshot showing Ethan's voicemail, timestamp 7:46 p.m., where he'd called me a filthy beggar after the church event. Erin circled the timestamp with her pen. Good. That's primary evidence. You also said his sister filmed the incident. I nodded. Candace, she posts everything online. Perfect, Erin said. Public recording. You're not the one exposing him. His own vanity will. She looked at me, measuring something. Do you want to teach him a lesson or just clear your name? I thought about that, the hum of traffic outside filling the silence. Both, I said, but I want it clean. She smiled. Then we build it clean. Write everything down, dates, witnesses, bills. Track every cent, every word. Keep your tone polite in every message. Quiet people are the ones juries believe. That afternoon, I stopped by the Columbus Credit Union where Lily's account sat. Marcos, the clerk I'd known since her college days, greeted me with a familiar smile. I didn't ask for balances, just guidance. If I wanted to document transfers on a joint account, I said, how would I do that legally? He showed me how to request transaction histories that Lily herself could access. Transparency, not interference, he said. I thanked him, wrote down every instruction, and left without touching a single cent. That night back home, I replayed Ethan's voicemail and saved it twice, once on my phone, once on a USB stick labeled NOV 20 call. Ohio's one-party consent law meant I could record inside my own home. Erin had confirmed that. On December 10th, I replaced the deadbolt on my front door. A grade 1 Schlager, heavy and sure. The old one I wrapped in newspaper and kept in a drawer. The new receipt went into my ledger behind the utility bills. I circled the date, Deck 10. By December 14th, I'd made my decision. I would invite him to dinner, not out of kindness, but for the stage justice needed. Christmas Eve, my house. 12 chairs. Witnesses disguised as family. I even made a list of seating. Pastor Jim near the end, Lily in the middle, Ethan directly across from me. On the same day, Erin sent an email. He's chasing a property flip. $618,842 due before Christmas. Needs Lily's consent to release funds. That number. It burned into my mind like scripture. If humiliation was his currency, that payoff was mine. I started assembling a gift bag for him. Red tissue, a gold ribbon. Inside, I placed a printed copy of his voicemail transcript. The photo Candace had posted of him throwing cash, and one of my wife's old wooden ornaments. A small carved dove. I taped a note inside the lid. Respect is still legal tender. The snow came heavy that night. I sat by the window, lights dim, the smell of pine in the air. I thought about that first phone call, 8:41 p.m., November 20th, and how a single act of restraint had set this all in motion. Erin's words echoed, "We'll let their signatures do the talking." So I picked up my pen and wrote the next entry in my notebook. Plan engaged. Dinner 12:24, witnesses set. Locks changed. Silence maintained. I closed the book and whispered to myself, he wanted noise. I'll give him proof instead. I asked for coffee at the North Market on a cold Thursday, December 11th, because sometimes public places make confessions feel less like confrontations. The place smelled of cinnamon and cheap pine. Lily arrived with her hair in a messy knot, cheeks pink from the walk. We sat at a small table by the window where the morning light hits the cold glass just right. I didn't start with anger. I started with a napkin. I slid the crumpled plumbing invoice across the table, $2,800. My neat handwriting on the margin where I'd noted parts replaced. I watched her face tighten when she saw it. Then I reached for my phone and showed her the bank notification I'd requested. A transfer of $68,500 out of her joint account on December 12th. She looked at the date and blinked like someone waking from sleep. Dad, I thought Ethan said that was just a placeholder, she whispered. I didn't argue. I put the napkin back down and said, we'll get clarity. That's all. We spoke like adults who were afraid not of each other, but of what silence could do. She told me about late-night texts, about Ethan's talk of a short-term hold to grease a real estate deal, about not reading the fine print because the numbers were supposed to be his expertise. Her hands shook. I folded my napkin and wrote the transfer amount, $68,500 on the corner, then the words, check consent. Small, tidy, like tightening a bolt. That afternoon, I bought a manila envelope and a book of certified mail stamps. Deck 15. I mailed a plain letter to Lily. My recollection of transfers, dates, and a request to confirm whether any disbursement required her signature. I had the post office print the receipt, Deck 15, certified Columbus, so the date would be a public stamped fact, not memory. The receipt went into my ledger beside the roof patch invoice from NOV 3 and the heater valve stub from NOV 9. Evidence accumulates like rings in an old tree. You can count them and know the age. On the 19th, I sat across from Erin again, this time with a hot paper cup and a stack of my own mistakes turned into records. She tapped a pen against a copy of the bank slip and said, "We prepare a neutral letter to the lender and title company. We ask for a pause on any disbursement pending written consent. No threats, just paperwork. It's cleaner that way." She wrote pause and underlined it as if underlining could put a hand on the throttle. She taught me small, lawful maneuvers that felt like learning a new tool. File a request for transaction history. Send certified mail. Keep receipts. Change locks and keep receipts for that too. If there was anything to be done in public, do it with proof. They love noise, she said, but the courts reward order. I liked the idea that order could be a kind of revenge. Quiet, inevitable, mechanical. When I left Erin's office, I stopped at the hardware store and bought a fresh padlock for the workshop and a new set of keys. I kept the old spare in my drawer, wrapped in the newspaper and stamped with the Deck 10 receipt. I tested the new lock twice. The clack felt honest. On December 20th, I went to the bank again. Marcos printed a stamped statement showing Lily's account activity back to November. He watched my hands as I slid the paper into an envelope. "Transparency first," he said low. "Then the rest." I nodded and tucked the printout behind the certified mail receipt in the manila envelope. I drafted a calm note to Ethan that evening. No accusations. Just an invitation. Christmas Eve dinner at my house, 6 p.m. Family only. I texted it at 7:03 p.m. He sent back a champagne emoji and a thumbs up at 7:09. People who throw money like confetti rarely think about receipts. They think applause. Between coffee and locks and bank runs, I built small lawful scaffolding. A voicemail copied to USB labeled NOV 20 call. A photo printed from Candace's post showing him mid-throw, the 20s arcing like a cheap blessing. A list of witnesses: Pastor Jim, Mrs. Valdez next door, Marcos at the credit union. I organized them like parts on a pegboard. Each has a place and a purpose. Erin prepared a plain letter template for Lily to sign if she wished. It said in simple language that she would not provide signature consent for any disbursement tied to the property flip without separate written authorization. No drama, only choice. I folded that letter and put it in the envelope with the bank slip and the certified mail receipt. The envelope felt heavier with each item I added. Finally, in the last week before Christmas, I wrapped a small, ordinary box for Ethan, nothing flashy. Inside, a copy of his own voicemail transcript, the photo of the cash on the floor, and one of my wife's carved wooden doves. A note inside the lid read, "Respect is still legal tender." I didn't plan to hand it to him yet. I would let the dinner do its work. Let the room be the witness. Methodical doesn't feel like poetry. It feels like a workbench, measured, slow, precise. But the satisfaction of a perfectly seated screw is close to the satisfaction of justice. I put the envelope on the shelf and checked the deadbolt again. The tools were ready. The witnesses were in place. The only thing left was to be still and let the signatures talk. He tried to copy my spare on December 10th. That was the first little thing that smelled like a pattern. Mrs. Valdez from next door told me she saw him at the kiosk by the hardware store, watching the clerk slide the key blank into the cutter. He said it was for a delivery, she told me over my fence as I carried a stack of shingles 2 days later. Her voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes people feel guilty, even if they aren't. I thanked her and made a note. Deck 10, key duplication attempt, witness, Mrs. Valdez. I circled the date in my ledger. That same week I bought the deadbolt on deck 14 and installed it myself at dusk, hands numb from the cold. The receipt went in the drawer with the roof patch stub and the heater valve ticket. Small acts, locked in paperwork. The old spare I wrapped in newspaper and slid under the bottom of my toolbox. If he wanted keys, he'd have to ask for them, and he wouldn't be getting any more surprises for free. Every little thing tightened like a wire under tension. Ethan started texting more. "I'll make this up to you," he wrote on deck 16 after I'd sent the certified letter. No apology, just a promise. Promises in text look like paper men. They fold easily. I forwarded the message to Erin and saved a screenshot in my phone folder labeled Ethan 2025. "Keep receipts," Erin had said. I was starting to like the sound of my own rules. The bank printout Marcos gave me on deck 20 showed a pattern I hadn't expected: small withdrawals that matched the dates of contractors Lily had hired, $200 here, $2,450 there. Then a larger transfer labeled short-term hold for $68,500 on deck 12. I circled the $68,500 in red ink and underlined consent. Twice. That number stung because it sat like a lever. With it, Ethan could force a release. Without Lily's signature, the deal couldn't close. That's where power lives, on the dotted line. Preparation doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like tightening bolts, sweeping sawdust off the bench, checking the level. But by deck 21, the air had a different taste. Nervous, like when a furnace kicks on in a cold house. Candace kept posting vague stories. Little gram clips of Ethan in a suit, glass in hand, captioned, "Big week, watch." I printed a still from one clip where he laughed with his hand full of bills and dated it, deck 18. "He's broadcasting," I told Erin. "He is," she said. "His own noise will be useful." I started placing people without making it obvious. Pastor Jim was already booked for the choir on Christmas Eve, but agreed to come early and sit through dinner. He'd seen the church incident and owed me an honest look. Mrs. Valdez promised to come if Lily asked. She wanted to be there to witness, not to fight. Marco said he'd come by with a copy of the printout if needed. He knew the bank manager and liked to do the right thing. I wrote their names under witnesses on a yellow legal pad and crossed them off one by one as they agreed. Then there were little tests. On desk 22, Ethan called and asked if he could drop by to pick up a spare wrench. I told him no, that the garage was off limits. He laughed it off. Sounded like a man with nothing to hide. Men like him build empires on people who assume goodwill forever. On deck 23, the house smelled like ham and pine. I rehearsed the lines I wouldn't say. I ironed a tablecloth and set the good plates. I placed my wife's carved dove at Lily's place setting, where she'd always sat as a child. I slid the envelope with the bank slip, certified mail receipt and voicemail transcript into my inside jacket pocket. It weighed more than I expected. That night I arranged the recorder on the mantel. It was small, one of those discreet recorders Erin had approved. Ohio is one-party consent. If it's my house, my device, my call, the recording is mine to keep. I tested it, a soft beep, the tiny red light catching the garland. I set it to record and left it low, like a mosquito buzz. It felt strange to play defense with a button, but the law was on my side, and the law keeps good company with patience. On Christmas Eve, snow fell hard enough to hush the street. Lily texted me at 3:12 p.m. "I'm nervous, Dad." I replied, "We're ready. Sit between Pastor Jim and me. Don't sign anything tonight. If he raises papers, read them first. I've got copies." She sent back a string of praying hands. Ethan arrived at 5:58 p.m., coat dusted with snow, smile broad as a radio host. He carried a bottle and a box of chocolates like props. Candace filmed the arrival, the same looping clip that to her was content. To me, it looked like an invitation to slip. Everything felt taut then, like a wire just before a struck note. I'd done the work, the witnesses were in place, the locks were changed. The receipts were lined up like soldiers. The only thing left was for the room to open and for signatures to do their slow, irresistible work. When you build something steady, You learn to enjoy the wait. The real drama wasn't in a shout. It was in seeing whether a man who throws money like dirt could face the clean truth laid on a table. He came in like he owned the air itself. December 24th, 5:58 p.m. The doorbell rang twice, sharp, impatient. I opened the door, and there stood Ethan, wrapped in that same camel coat from the church, snow glinting on his shoulders. He was holding a bottle of sparkling wine, voice booming before his feet even crossed the threshold. "Merry Christmas, old man," he said, as if kindness could overwrite humiliation. Lily followed a step behind him, eyes down. Candace trailed last, phone already in her hand, red recording light blinking like a warning. "Let's make it festive," she said. Pastor Jim's car was parked out front, his familiar hat visible through the window. Every chair had a name card, every plate perfectly placed. On the mantel, my small recorder blinked faintly beneath the garland, just a quiet witness. I handed Ethan his gift, a red box tied in gold ribbon. "Open it after dinner," I said. He grinned. "Saving the surprises, huh?" He winked at Lily, poured himself a drink, and began his usual performance. Stories of big flips, upcoming closings, partnerships in motion. His words sounded like champagne bubbles, loud, fast, mostly air. Candace filmed everything, humming approval between giggles. Dinner began. Forks clinked. Ham and mashed potatoes went around. I passed him the salt and said nothing. I could feel the tension coil in the room, each clink of silverware counting down. At 6:22 p.m., I said softly, "Ethan, before dessert, maybe open your gift." He laughed. "Come on, Dad, really." Still, he tore at the paper like a kid at a tree. First came the photo Candace had posted weeks ago, him mid-throw, 20s frozen mid-air. His grin flickered. Next, the transcript of his voicemail, "You filthy beggar." The room went quiet, except for the scrape of a chair leg. Lily's eyes locked on his. "Is this supposed to be funny?" he asked, voice thinning. "No," I said, calm. "That's what you left behind." "Keep going." He unfolded the next paper, the bank slip dated December 12th. The transfer $6,500 from Lily's joint account to an escrow company linked to his flip. A small highlight over requires co-signer consent. His smile vanished. "Where'd you get this?" "Transparency," I said. "Marcos helped me understand how joint accounts work. Without Lily's consent, that transfer's reversible. And Aaron, my attorney, made sure of it." He laughed once, too loud. "You're bluffing." "No," I said, sliding a second document forward. "This is a certified letter mailed on December 15th, postmarked, verified, and a witness statement from Mrs. Valdez about the key duplication. I have it all, Ethan." Candace's camera lowered slowly. "Maybe we don't need to," she began, but I raised a hand. "Keep filming. This is your brother's kind of show." Pastor Jim cleared his throat. "Son," he said gently, "you owe this man more than a dinner." Ethan's face reddened, the mask cracking. He turned to Lily. "Baby, this is business, you know that." Lily shook her head. "Not when you use my name behind my back." I watched him realize how deep the pit was. The $689 dialing, $842 payoff he'd bragged about, due before Christmas, needed Lily's consent. And now it was frozen, legally, until further notice. "You think this will ruin me," he said, voice shaking between fury and disbelief. I leaned forward slightly. "No, Ethan, you did that the moment you treated family like furniture." He slammed his palm on the table. "You'll regret this." "I already did," I replied quietly. "That's why I stopped letting you write the story." He stood, chair screeching against the floor, but Pastor Jim and Marcos, who had quietly arrived with a folder in hand, both stood too. Not to threaten, just to witness. Ethan looked at the faces around the table and saw for once that no one was laughing with him. The air was thick with silence. Candace's camera was still recording, capturing the moment when his voice cracked into something small. He looked at the papers one last time, his own words, his own numbers, and knew every line was his handwriting. "I said only one more thing. You called me a beggar. Tonight I collect." He froze, unable to respond. Candace reached out to touch his arm, but he brushed her off and walked out into the falling snow. The sound of his shoes muffled by everything he'd just lost. The red light on the recorder blinked once more, then went still. The proof was captured, the show over. The twist wasn't loud, it was written. He didn't flip the table. He just froze, staring down at his own words spread across my dinner plates. The photo, the voicemail transcript, the transfer slip, all of it laid out like a mirror no one asked for. I leaned back in my chair, calm in a way I hadn't been since that night at the church. The recorder on the mantel hummed faintly, that tiny red light steady against the garland. "You said you'd handle the plumbing," I began, voice low. "You said you'd treat Lily like a partner. But these papers say otherwise." Candace tried to speak. "This is a family matter. We shouldn't—" I cut her off, quiet but clear. "Family ends the moment someone throws money at it." Lily's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope labeled Boundary Letter. Erin had written it with her in mind. A simple statement, pausing any use of her name or signature on Ethan's property deal. Lily read it aloud, every syllable a small rebellion. "I, Lily Morgan, decline to consent to any financial transaction using my name without separate, written approval." Her voice wavered, but didn't break. Ethan snorted. "You don't even know what that means." "I know enough," she said. "And I've learned how to read fine print." Marcos, the bank clerk, stepped forward from the hallway, where he'd been waiting with Pastor Jim. He handed Lily a stamped confirmation slip, the bank's. Notice that morning freezing the 68,500 until further authorization. "It's official," he said gently. Ethan's chair screeched back across the hardwood. "You went to my bank? Are you kidding me?" Marcos shook his head. "Your joint account. And it's not just yours anymore." The sound of his breath changed. Fast, shallow, desperate. I'd seen that look before on men who thought power came from swagger, not signatures. He turned toward me. "You did this." "I did nothing but protect what's mine," I said. "And you made it easy." Candace's phone lowered to her lap. For once, she didn't film. Pastor Jim broke the silence. "Maybe it's time you apologize, son." Ethan's eyes darted to Lily, then back to me. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a choke. "All this for a couple $1,000s?" I slid the crumpled invoice across the table, the same one from the church hall, now marked paid in blue ink. "It was never about the money," I said. "It was about respect. You mistook silence for weakness." The room went still except for the ticking clock over the doorway. I stood and poured coffee into the only empty cup on the table, Ethan's. "You said I was a beggar," I told him. "Turns out I was just collecting receipts." He looked at the papers again, the signatures, the bank stamp, the dates. The fight drained out of him. Lily sat straighter. Candace wiped her eyes. Pastor Jim's hand rested on the table, steady as stone. Finally, Ethan spoke, barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" "Accountability," I said. "You return the funds. You hand back my spare key. You send Lily a written apology. And you sign a written acknowledgement of debt settled. No more deals in her name. Do that and I'll keep the rest between us." He stared at me, jaw tight. "And if I don't?" "Then tomorrow Erin files for an injunction and a complaint to the lender. You'll lose the deal and the reputation." Lily reached for the pen. "Ethan," she said softly, "just sign it." For a long second he didn't move, then his shoulders slumped. He picked up the pen. The nib scratched across paper, loud in the quiet room. When he was done, I slid a final sheet toward him, a simple statement of apology for the church incident. "Make this right, too." He hesitated, then signed. "Satisfied?" He muttered. "Not yet," I said. "Transfer the 2800 tonight, and the rest will wait for the bank to clear." He pulled out his phone, tapping with shaking fingers. A soft ping hit mine seconds later, a confirmation of transfer. $2,800, the exact amount he'd thrown at my shoes. I took a deep breath, folded the invoice, and wrote paid across it in firm strokes. I looked him in the eye. "Now we're even." He stood, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "You'll regret humiliating me." I shook my head. "You did that all by yourself." "I just set the table. As he left, snow gusted through the open door, swirling around his feet before the night swallowed him. Candace followed silently, her camera off for once. When the door closed, I turned off the recorder and exhaled. Lily leaned into my shoulder, whispering, "You really called Aaron that same night." 8:41 p.m., I said, smiling faintly. "First call I made after he threw that cash." Pastor Jim nodded once. "Quiet justice," he said. "Best kind," I replied. The lights flickered against the window, soft and golden. Outside, Ethan's car tires crunched the snow. Inside, peace finally had a sound again. The small, honest hum of a home, with its dignity restored. Paper didn't shout, it closed. December 26th, 9:05 a.m., the courthouse lot was rimmed with frost, the flag above it snapping against a grey Ohio sky. Erin met me at the steps, gloved hands carrying a folder so thick it could hold winter itself. Inside were copies of the signed apology, the certified mail receipt, and the bank's confirmation that the $68,500 had been returned to Lily's account. "This is what respect looks like on paper," she said, handing me a copy. The letterhead gleamed faintly under the morning light. The title company had frozen Ethan's pending payout, $609.99,842, pending investigation. I didn't gloat. I just felt something click back into place, like a stripped screw catching the right thread again. At 10:11 a.m., we filed the formal notice of consent withdrawal and a courtesy copy for the lender. No drama, no shouting, just signatures and stamps. Erin always said that revenge was loud, but justice whispered. She was right. That afternoon, Marcos called from the credit union. "The reversal went through," he said, voice full of quiet satisfaction. "Funds restored. Account clean." I thanked him and jotted it down in my ledger, deck 26. Reversal confirmed 10:47 a.m. Then I drove home. When I walked in, the house smelled like pine and furniture polish. The table from Christmas Eve still had faint cup rings, marks of where truth had finally settled. A knock came at the door. It was Ethan. No coat, no entourage, just the weight of realization clinging to him. He held out my spare key between two fingers, hand trembling slightly. "You win," he muttered. I shook my head. "No, Ethan, the rules won. You just broke them." He nodded, eyes down, and left without another word. I watched him walk down the salted steps, smaller than I'd ever seen him. Inside, I placed the key in a drawer next to my wife's ornament. Then I opened my phone. The transfer alert blinked. $2,800 received. Payment complete? I pulled out the original invoice, drew a blue line across it, and wrote one word in block letters: paid. At 3:11 p.m., Erin texted a single message. "All filings confirmed. He's out of leverage. Case closed." I sent back a thank you and added the message printout to my folder marked Church to Christmas. Justice wasn't cinematic. It was methodical. The world didn't cheer, no music swelled. Just me, standing in a quiet kitchen with a drawer full of receipts and peace finally measurable in pages, not dollars. That evening, I took Lily to open a new account in her own name. She wore the same winter hat she'd worn as a kid, pink pom-pom bobbing as she signed the forms. The banker slid the papers across the counter, and she signed without hesitation. "Feels good, doesn't it?" I asked. She smiled. "Feels safe." The pen scratched across the form, another signature sealing something right. I slipped the carbon copy into my ledger. When we stepped outside, the sun was already sinking. Snow glowed faintly gold, like forgiveness in layers. For the first time in weeks, I didn't look over my shoulder or check the lock twice. Erin's words echoed as the wind caught my collar. The proud always fall loud. The patient rise quietly, and that's exactly what I'd done. Quietly, completely, revenge wasn't the point. Respect was. A week later, the snow along High Street had turned grey with salt and tire dust. I walked to the church pantry with a brown envelope in my pocket, the same one he'd thrown money into my life with. Inside it were the same 20s, smoothed and counted, now bound with a paper band that read, "Anonymous with respect." The volunteers smiled as I placed it on the donation table. The room smelled like coffee and stew. The radiator hissed softly. "Bless you," one of them said. I just nodded. It wasn't blessing I wanted. It was balance. That's the thing no one tells you about dignity. It weighs the same as grief. You just carry it better. When I got home, I opened my old notebook, the one that started with a single line. He threw money at my feet. I added one last entry, Deck 30. Funds returned, accounts clear, house peaceful. Then I closed it and slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk. The act of shutting that drawer felt like turning a page I'd been stuck on for years. I walked through the house, touching things like I was reacquainting myself with ownership. The tools on the pegboard, the kitchen counter, the framed photo of my wife with her garden gloves on. She used to say some people need to see the fence before they stop pushing. Ethan had seen the fence. And this time, it was made of paperwork and silence. Lily stopped by later that evening with homemade soup. We ate at the same table where the showdown had happened. The same plates, same light. But this time, laughter filled the room again. The easy kind that doesn't owe anyone anything. "Do you think he'll ever change?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "But I don't need him to. That's the gift." Before she left, she hugged me and said, "You didn't lose me, Dad. You just saved both of us." After she drove off, I turned off every light except the one above the mantel. The recorder still sat there, its tiny red light dark now. I didn't delete the file. Some truths deserve to be kept, not replayed. I took the painter's tape label from the evidence box, Ethan, $2,800, church, and pressed it inside my notebook cover. A reminder that respect isn't owed. It's earned and documented. That night, as the house settled into quiet, I realized the storm had passed without breaking a single window. The damage had been emotional, not structural. And I'd rebuilt something more important than walls, the boundary between mercy and self-respect. In the end, justice hadn't made me richer. It had just made me steady again. And in a world full of noise, steadiness is wealth. He wanted a flip. He got a mirror instead. By New Year's week, the story of Ethan's deal had made the rounds through Columbus's small real estate circles. Word spreads fast when money stops moving. The title company froze his payout, the lender quietly pulled back, and the buyer he'd been bragging about stopped returning calls. He wasn't ruined, just revealed. And men like him fear exposure more than loss. I didn't celebrate. I shoveled snow, brewed coffee, kept the house warm. Peace isn't loud. It's the click of a furnace starting, the hum of a fridge when everything's in order. Candace posted a short video on December 30th. A shaky selfie with the caption, "Family drama. But growth is good." It got maybe a dozen likes. No one cared for her version anymore. People can smell when a story's missing its receipts. Ethan texted Lily once that week, "I need space." She never replied. I told her silence was sometimes the kindest answer, especially when the truth is already public record. On January 2nd, Lily brought over her laptop and showed me the balance in her new account. Her name alone on the top line, no cosigner, no shared access. "You did this," she said. "No," I told her. "You just learned how to sign your own name in peace." She smiled. The same smile she had when she got her first paycheck at 17. That one moment, her looking at her own numbers. Her own signature was worth every quiet night I'd spent documenting and waiting. In the garage, I started restoring my old cedar toolbox, the one I'd used back when my wife was alive. The smell of sanded wood filled the air, mixed with oil and cold winter dust. Piece by piece, I brought it back to life, brushing away rust, tightening the hinges. It felt symbolic, repairing something built to last that had been neglected too long. Sometimes I'd catch myself glancing at the old key Ethan had returned. I'd kept it in the drawer, taped to his signed apology. Not as a trophy, just as proof that even arrogance can be surrendered if you hold your line. On January 5th, I replaced the porch light Lily had loved as a kid, the one shaped like a lantern. When I flipped the switch, the glow washed across the driveway, soft and steady. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like mine again. Ethan faded from conversation. People who chase quick money tend to outrun their own names. The papers he'd signed sat filed neatly under December, between electric bills and repair stubs. No need to revisit them, they'd already done their work. That evening, I made tea, sat at the table and read the note I'd written weeks ago in my ledger. Stay very quiet. It had carried me through every temptation to shout, every urge to retaliate. I realized now it wasn't just advice. It was strategy. Before turning in, I walked out onto the porch, snow crunching beneath my boots. The neighborhood was still, holiday lights blinking lazily on eaves. I looked at the warm window glow spilling onto the snow and whispered, "Some debts you collect in silence." Then I turned off the porch light, knowing it would turn back on again tomorrow, bright, automatic, faithful. Like respect, once you wire it right, it stays on its own. The man who threw money learned the most expensive word in English. Sorry. January 6th, Columbus. I was sanding the last corner of my cedar toolbox when I heard the soft crunch of tires outside. Through the frosted window, I saw Ethan's car, idling low, his silhouette sitting still for a moment before the door opened. He stood there on the walkway, shoulders hunched, hands empty. Not the man who'd strutted into my church or laughed over champagne, just a man with nowhere left to perform. He knocked once. I opened the door and waited. He didn't speak right away. His eyes darted past me, maybe looking for Lily, maybe for a way out. "Can we talk?" he said finally. His voice was hoarse, stripped of its polish. I nodded and stepped aside. He looked smaller under my porch light, the same one I'd replaced days earlier. "I came to give you this," he said, handing me a folded paper. I didn't need to open it to know what it was, a printed apology, typed, dated, signed. Real contrition isn't in the words, it's in the posture of the man handing them over. "I lost the property," he said. "Investors pulled out. They said the paperwork was messy." "Paperwork's just honesty written down," I told him. "It scares people who fake confidence." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't expect forgiveness. But Lily, she deserves better than how I handled things." "She's already getting better," I said. "You just make sure you learn how to tell the truth before you touch her name again." He glanced toward the living room, the same table where he'd once sat and signed his surrender. "You kept all the papers." "Yes," I said, "because history repeats itself when people stop keeping records." He gave a small, tired laugh. "You're colder than I thought." "No," I said, "just organized." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check, small but more than symbolic. "For the pantry," he said. "You told them anonymous, but they knew it was you, thought I could do the same." I took it, nodded, and said, "You're learning." He turned to leave, hesitated on the step, then looked back. "You ever gonna forgive me?" "I already did," I said, "the night you signed your name." He stared at me a long second, then walked to his car, snow hissing beneath his tires as he drove off. The sound faded until only the wind remained. Inside, I placed the new apology beside the first one in my drawer, folded cleanly behind my wife's ornament. I closed the drawer and leaned against it, letting the quiet settle like fresh snow. I realized something then. Revenge isn't about making someone hurt the way they hurt you. It's about building the kind of peace they can't disturb anymore. I looked around the house, the lights, the order, the stillness, and smiled. Everything I'd built, everything I'd defended, stood exactly where it belonged. Before. Turning in, I opened my notebook one last time and wrote the final line beneath months of entries. "You didn't lose me. You gave me away the night you threw money at my feet. I just picked up what you dropped, my dignity." Then I closed the book, turned off the lamp and let the house rest, warm, whole, and finally mine.